Welcome to the Explorers Podcast with Ken Bowen. Here, Ken connects with friends and peers to discuss issues in the world and practices to improve one's biblical perspective.
Hi, this is Ken Bowen. We're with Explorers, and this time I have my dear friend and associate, Archie Wanamaker. Hey, Archie, you've been with me for many years. I go back to when you were just a little tyke.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Delightful to have you with us.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah. 36 years this August.
36 years it was. And how old were you at that time?
25.
25.
Yeah.
So you can do the math. It's amazing. So age comes upon us, but it's amazing to see how the journey has been one of maturity and growth and development. But we've walked together through a lot of things. We've been covenant friends.
Yes. Yes. And for that, I'm grateful.
Yeah. It's a deep gratitude I have for you. And we were talking about something you sent to me. Tell us about this, because it has to do with the loss of hope and the need for perseverance.
Yeah. Yep. So it was triggered. I was 58, 59, started reaching out to older friends and asking them 3 questions about life. As I looked ahead, kind of the analogy of a car driving down the road. They had passed mile markers that I saw from a distance. I wanted to know, there's probably some potholes up there, some curves. Maybe they took too fast, or maybe they just got T-boned through the intersection.
Yeah.
Just something that just blindsided them. So with that, I came with the question of, as you look back, is there something that you wish you had paid attention to that you ignored? Second question was, is there something that just totally blindsided you, that you just didn't see coming? And thirdly, what was your greatest joy?
Those are good questions.
Yeah.
Tell me about how that worked. and it's because it's a diagnostic tool. You're forcing people and encouraging and enhancing their ability to go beyond what they're going to do themselves. Most people can't get inside of that. And you need somebody to come alongside of you and who cares for you enough and who's not manipulating you. That's always a problem. Finding somebody you can trust, but who is a doctor of the soul, as it were, someone who watches over your soul.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and the interesting thing, I'd say the characteristic about all these men that I spoke to that are in their 70s and 80s are all actively involved in life with Jesus, life with others. They have not they're not sitting on the sidelines waving pom-poms. They're in the game.
So they're a rare number. That's a
rare breed.
Yeah. How does that happen? Why? And because we well know that most men, many aspire, but few attain. Most people drop out out of the race and bench themselves and sit and watch the game from the crowd.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. I ran into a friend a couple of weeks ago. We were at church up in Johns Creek to see a friend who plays in the Johns Creek Symphony. And as we walked down, he was one of the ushers. Well, I looked at this guy and I said, Knox, and he looked at me. He was in our group 30 years ago. We haven't seen him in 25 years in our Bible study down a little 5 points. So we had a quick conversation. I said, let's get together afterwards. We'll grab a dessert and catch up. So it'd been 25 years. So we spent about an hour together. And at the end of the conversation, he had a great question that no one's ever asked me. He said, why are you guys still in it? He said, I've seen so many people fall out.
Yes.
What keeps you in it? And it really made me pause and think, not just the Sunday school answer, well, Jesus saved me. Well, of course, that is true.
Yeah.
But in any relationship, there comes a point where you have to really choose. As you said, we've burned the bridges and there's no turning back.
Right.
But to realize that at a very crucial point, especially if you feel, quote, God has betrayed you or turned his back on you or has gone silent, when that fourth component of growth, of suffering, that we get, I think it was Jack Taylor maybe called it the baptism of suffering.
Yes.
But to have that and enter into it and go through it and still be walking with God, I think is what he was inferring.
I think that makes complete sense, because there's a natural process of elimination.
Yes.
And we know Jesus makes it very clear. And when you talk about the parable of the soils and the number of people who are the good soil, I think I think you and I have talked about it. We think it may be less than 1% of people who claim to be Christians or churchgoers. And it's a tiny number. And it's the grace of God. When was it about you or about me that gave us the grace to be able to have that appetite, that desire. I didn't create that. So he gave us, you and me, and I saw that in you when I first met you. There was a kind of a hunger that is very rare. And I saw that there's a person who has been graced by God. There's a kind of an anointing that takes place. And part of our job is to pitch our message, as you have been faithfully doing, to four soil people, and then so they would catch it, and then they would convey it to others. The 2 Timothy 2:2 concept.
Yes.
It's been a part of, I think it's been a mark of your discipleship as well, the intergenerational connection.
Yeah. And interesting enough, I was with some friends last week, and they were talking, they're involved globally, and I shared this less than 1%, and they said, well, if we disciple 100, we're fortunate to get 10, but more than likely we'll get somewhere between 1 and 5 who will take what Jesus has given them and then reproduce it amongst their tribal members or friends and whatever.
And they have a better likelihood than people in North America. So that's even more interesting because they're already enduring suffering more than we do. So suffering, really, it's those who go through adversity who are going to be more open and humbled by virtue of that, as opposed to those who are more autonomous and have the illusions of having made themselves and so forth. So I think that's a good word. But then it's always the invisible 30, 60, 100-fold that we can't quantify. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah, and that idea of desire, holy desire, that's mystery to me. I can't explain it. I look around and I see other guys who've experienced similar encounters, a number of guys that we've seen come and go through Wednesday morning over 35 years. And somewhere along the way, they made a choice. And those that choose the narrow gate and follow Jesus, irregardless of the circumstances, irregardless of whether you understand what he did and why he did it, but just because he is, that you got to shift your trust into him, period, in a paragraph.
Yeah, and leaning into that takes profound risk, and many people are not going to be willing to take the risk to do it. But at the end of the day, there is no risk in the idea that you may get more life if you do this or that. It's a matter of, we're all terminal. And the real risk is, am I going to risk what's passing away and take those things and not try to pursue more of what's passing away, or am I going to invest in eternity? Hard to convey that to people, though.
Yes.
So we're talking about the way God uses experience, loss of influence, connections, and energies. Tell me more about how you're thinking about that as a vehicle that God has often used to get people into the point of receptivity and to get their attention.
Yes, I think what came to mind is, I think it was it Robert Clinton? Making of a Leader?
Making of a Leader, Robert Clinton.
And we must have read that 30 years ago and discussed it and talked about it. But it was that fifth stage of growth. But you only get there if you invest into the relationships in the first, second, third, and fourth stages. And those that are rich in relationships in their 60s and 70s and 80s who are still cultivating what has been sown over those many decades previously seem to have the abundant life that Jesus speaks of with him and with others. And I think that you have to make that intentional. You have to create space for it, but you also have to be intentional about it. And back to the desire that God touches the heart of men and inspires them. And then there's this response, though, that we must have to it. That is a choice, I think, coupled with his grace, and how those two interplay, I don't know, but they walk alongside one another for sure. And by making the choice to follow Jesus when he said, come and follow me, that's a long obedience in the same direction.
And you were referring, just to help those who are with us understand what you're referring to with Robert Clinton's book, The Making of a Leader. I have created a timeline, and I know you've done this as well. And the first one was, in my life, it was Sovereign Foundations, and I think this is pretty consistent. There's going to be variations in which God emphasizes, but I kind of followed a standard timeline where it was sovereign foundations followed by inner life growth. And I could pretty well identify those two periods. And the third one was ministry maturing. And I remember when that happened. And then life, what he calls life maturing. And then number 5 is convergence. That's what you're talking about, is the 5th stage. And I don't think many people arrive at that, but there are temptations that would prevent us from doing that. The conflict that they've had, the failures, the disappointments, and so forth.
And if a guy has invested in, and so just watching my father retire at 62 after a corporate career, but he retired from everything. And he had a loss of connections. He had a loss of influence. And at that time, he was still fairly healthy. But over time, his energy diminished because he lost really the passion for living.
Yeah.
And there was kind of like an existence more than life. So I saw that and I said, well, I sure don't want to go down that road. So what do I take and how do I apply the things that I've learned? So if someone has invested in those things in say their job all their life or whatever it is outside of Jesus, and it's not people and the Lord, you wake up one day and you're kind of at the end of your career and you realize I no longer have any influence. I don't have the connections because my relationships were transactional versus interpersonal.
They were transactional.
And I've got this diminished amount of energy. Now what do I do? Kind of thing.
Yeah, it was all for purpose, instrumental purpose. People were not ends in themselves, but means to ends. And so they were conceived of as sources of provision rather than means that God may or may not use.
That's right.
That always obligates us to manipulate people to get our needs met. There's a text in this message. It was very helpful when I got a message from you, and I'm really referring to that. Just to share the outline with everyone.
Sure.
Because you said in reflecting on weariness and its possible causes, you said what came to mind was, and we've just alluded briefly, but it's helpful to hear 3 points that you came up with. Too much conflict over a long period. Secondly, too many failures or accumulated disappointments. And 3, too many unfulfilled dreams or expectations. And then what does a person do with it? Do they become bitter? And often that'll happen. And then they get a cancer of bitterness and resentment and so forth. And they become almost it's a kind of autoimmune disease, a spiritual autoimmune disease where it attacks itself, which is a terrible thing to watch, where they've seen people succumb to that bit and they become a grump.
Right.
They're not just grumping, they become that.
Right. You referred to them this morning, the hardening of the categories.
Hardening of the category. So then you were talking about in this important email that you sent to me, and that you did at that Windy Gap core meeting. You were involved in that core meeting at Windy Gap, and this was so helpful to me. But the weariness for recipe, the loss of influence, connections, and energies, which then you referred to 2 texts of Scripture, Galatians 6:9-10, which was one of those texts. I think it's important for us to address together as well. Let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap if we do not grow weary. And then he says, so then while we have opportunity, let us do good to all men, or all people, and especially those who are of the household of faith. That's a lovely word, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the idea, why you have opportunity, why do people lose heart then? You've seen it happen. We've just described some of the reasons.
Yeah, and I think, especially with that verse, I think it's saying you got to look beyond what's seen.
Yes.
And you and I talked about this years ago with, you can invest years or maybe decades into somebody's life, and then they just blow out.
They blow out.
Or walk out for whatever reason. And I think the disappointments can creep in if we're looking for measurable results. How many people attend my Bible study? How much money have I made? What's my circle of influence look like? All these measurable things that the world says is success versus have I been faithful to the things that God has entrusted to me? Have I stewarded those things well?
Yes.
Am I still fixed on the things that are important here, people, but also am I looking forward to what lies ahead? Mm-hmm. So I have my brother's 70. He's got They gave him 6 months to live. He's got terminal cancer.
I see.
And one of the things that I'm praying for him is that he'll have joyful anticipation, that death is a fearful thing because none of us have been through it. So we can have a lot of theology about it, but the experiential reality of someone looking at you and saying you've got a short amount of time is, as you've said, death clarifies the mind.
Yeah, the prospect of being hung in a fortnight marvelously clarifies the mind.
Yes.
I think it was something that Boswell's Johnson. But the idea of realizing that it's lingering, it's there, and to pursue what we were just talking about earlier. The forest soil means going to be small, but they're going to be the ones whose impact we can't quantify.
Right.
So how do I treasure the unseen over the seen is what it keeps coming back to your eternal perspective.
Yes.
Is my life one of diminishment, or am I really being prepared for the real party ahead,
Yes.
the real story, the real journey? And am I living with a joyful anticipation where I realize my impact will be hidden?
Mm-hmm.
I won't know what it is, nor am I supposed to. I'd live for the results. But rather, I'm sending it on ahead so there'll be friends to welcome me. And that's what you've been doing all your life. And I've observed that, how you and Maxanne have continually invested in people, taken them under your wings, encouraged, equipped, and empowered them to become more like Jesus. And really, they're following your example, but you provide an incarnate example, it seems to me. You incarnate, you make it real. Here's the way, let me show you what it looks like. So you have an apprentice, as it were, and you're the master, and God made you the master because you had to be broken.
Yes.
So it is through that brokenness that you become the agent of radical change in the lives of others. This is what I've seen in you.
Yeah, brokenness. And that's another one of those places where I think men grow weary and lose heart. They don't realize that that's a part of the process. It's not just a part, it's a continual part of being broken.
That's correct. I mean, you mentioned the other verse that you mentioned, it was the Hebrews 12:3. And that's exactly what you just said. You even quoted from it. Consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself. So immediately, what kind of I'm not going to face anything as Jesus faced, but to consider that. So you will not grow weary and lose heart. So consider him means that he's going to do it. You fix your eyes on Jesus, and then it makes all the difference in the world. But how is it possible for a man to do that when they're tempted to fix their eyes on the world? They've got to train themselves to become so spring-loaded toward the eternal perspective that they fix their eyes on Jesus rather than looking at the circumstances. It's hard, isn't it?
Yep. And it's one of those things, just, the continual putting yourself up as a living sacrifice. It's, sometimes it's certainly daily, and sometimes it's moment by moment. It's as the living sacrifice tends to crawl on and off the altar. And it's the renewal of your mind. And I think it's to what you were speaking of this morning about faith, that faith is an action. And as we exercise that faith muscle in our hearts, then we are participating in the life that Jesus, I think, wants for us. So we're continuously leveraging, right, and pressing on versus pulling back in a protective mode.
Yes.
But we're pioneers, not settlers, and we want to keep pressing on.
Yeah, it's a good word, and that's a good metaphor. Pioneers, not settlers. And you press on because you're at home. We were not meant to settle in this wilderness. We were meant to continue to go to the promised land. But when the wilderness creates the illusion of fecundity and wealth, and suddenly it becomes very attractive.
Very attractive.
Man, I don't know about this other place. I know it. I can see, and as you said, men are mile markers. So they want to look at the visible and and the more they have, the more they'll be clinging to it, and the more they'll be setting their eyes on that and not on the things that God is. So discipline, and you mentioned the idea of it's a daily thing. It's a training, isn't it?
It is a training. Just like the analogies that Paul uses about, the runner and the race, and we're all pressing on towards a prize. But that any runner knows you got to train, and especially if you're going to run a marathon, that doesn't come easily. And just that same idea, I think that I did one marathon, and it was a great analogy for life in 1991 before I went in probably one of the most difficult years of my life in 92, 93. Wow. But in realizing as I entered into the race that I was not quite prepared.
Not quite prepared for the marathon.
And at the most difficult point in the journey, when I hit the wall about 18 or 19 miles in, I felt great, 13, 14 miles. But then all of a sudden, lactic acid started building up. I had blisters, and it was miserable. So I still had a good, 8 miles to go. And so I was walking a bit, and then I was stopping drinking water, and then I was trying to think about, well, I could go home, but then Maxanne was at Piedmont Park, and I didn't know how to find her. And then I could ride the MARTA station, but I didn't think I could make it up the stairs. And then the ultimate is you wait for the sagging wagon. They come to pick up the leftovers.
The sagging wagon.
So I eventually started walking a little bit, and then I remember getting to this hill in Inman Park. It's on North Island, and I had a shirt that said, "Not by power nor by might, but by my spirit, saith the Lord." Zechariah, maybe 4:9. But a girl came up next to me and she said, "You know that verse, it's a song." And she started to sing it.
I see.
And by the time we got to the top of that hill, she stopped singing. I turned over and she was gone. Gone. I just kept running, got to the finish line. It was kind of interesting. It was a little glimmer of heaven. There was Maxanne waiting for me. I was moved emotionally because I knew there were so many times where I just wanted to quit and give up. So I walked over and sat down. And a few minutes later, this guy comes up and says, "Hey, I just want to thank you." I said, "For what?" He says, "You didn't know, but I was about 100 yards behind you when you were having a really difficult time. I was too. And I kept watching you, and you kept pressing on and kept going, and you inspired me." And I thought later, that's a great picture of life. When we think we're just totally failing, ready to give up, but we continue to press on. There's somebody behind us who's looking, who's watching to say, how does this all really work out when life gets hard?
Yeah.
When money's not flowing in, when the relationships are tough, when the marriage isn't really easy, when the kids aren't doing what we thought they'd do. All those things start stirring, but it's that continual pursuit.
Yes.
And here this guy was being inspired in the midst of what I felt like was the worst moment of the race for me.
That's incredible. So you don't know that others are looking.
You don't know that others are looking, but they are.
Wow. I mean, that's a vivid story because it really happened, but it's a parable as well. It reminds me of two things. One, another from Hebrews, that many have entertained angels unawares. So it strikes me as that's, because I've had angelic encounters. That couldn't have been something other than that.
We were 20 to 21 miles into the race. And again, retrospectively looking back, I said she wasn't huffing or puffing and had not a bead of sweat on her forehead.
That's another thing. But then she and just at that moment when you most needed it. Mm-hmm. And then at that moment when you did that, then the other person sees that in the story, there's the song itself, the text of scripture, Zechariah. And then him seeing you, if he can do it, I can do it. Mm. So here's the text then that comes to my mind from the Hebrews, because we were just quoting, "Consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself." So don't grow weary and lose heart. But the verses before, the two verses, "Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance." I love that metaphor. And all these things, because we get so tethered to things that we're carrying them with us. It's like carrying our physical junk with us. When you're running a marathon, you're carrying a typewriter or something like that. Get rid of that stuff. Or you got your left leg is chained to some kind of a computer, and another right lane content to a desk. Lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us. Beautiful metaphor, isn't it? Run with endurance the race set before us, and then that person, that being, it said, picture your eyes back on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, is sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So if he can do that, he becomes the ultimate exemplar. And of course, we know that the one who's the infinite word, I now say, is now the incarnate word, who's now the indwelling word.
Mm.
So the idea that you're indwelled by infinity and eternity in a very meaningful sense, fixing your eyes on Jesus, but still there's some kind of mediation that we need, and that's to me an exemplar of that. And that person in your life needed that mediation.
Mm.
So just now, you don't know the effect of that. It'd be wonderful if you could have reconnected with that person.
Yeah. No telling. But that's a motivator when you think about why do you stay in it. I'd say, well, one is I know people are looking. Not that I'm concerned about impressing, but I do want to steward what God has entrusted to me to inspire others.
Yeah,
that cloud of witness. Mm-hmm. So I know my kids are looking. I was sharing with our Wednesday guys a while back. I said, this could be your most important season in life because your kids are watching. And chances are when they hit 60 and 70, we won't be here. I mean, Lord will, I'd be 90-something years old when Archie turns 60.
It gets a point where it's not worth it anymore.
The math just doesn't work.
Yeah. And I'm getting more homesick and world-weary anyway.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But so that component really inspires me at this season of life to say, how do I live that life before them authentically, transparently, imperfectly, but with true direction and intentionality? How do I live that life in such a way? Well, lean into Jesus, intimacy with Him first and foremost, because that'll shape my thoughts and my actions.
It'll shape it all.
Attitudes, everything.
Yes, you're exactly right. This cloud of witnesses, there's a cloud of witnesses from the Hebrew Bible, and he's referring to those people and to the spirit of the saints, not all those people who are watching, but there are people in your life who've been watching you, and you do not know. And won't know until you stand before Jesus and then before others or with others in that happy fellowship of reuniting and realization. You don't know this, but let me take you let me show you what that did.
Yeah.
And the incredible stories that will be told because of one thing leading to another. You can't, as you know, you can't sin in a vacuum. And you can't be righteous in a vacuum.
Right.
And he was faithful in a very little thing,
Be faithful in much.
And who was righteous, unrighteous, and unrighteous, and much so compound interest. So those are powerful thoughts, though. I mean, just so you think about the people that you haven't yet met.
Yes.
That you're going to be ministering to. I've been thinking about that more. I think it's a rather good thing to think about home.
Yeah, keeping our eyes and thinking that's our destiny. So it's reflected on that passage when it says Jesus knew where he came from, the Father, knew where he's going to, right? And then therefore what? He humbled himself and washed the disciples' feet. How could the Son of God do that? Well, because he knew.
Yeah.
He knew his origin,
God,
his destiny.
Back to God. And then he knew all things had been given in his hands.
Yeah.
Powerful, isn't it?
Powerful.
Yeah. So the John 13, and we have the same resources. So we've all things have been given into our hands, all spiritual blessings, and that we have come forth from God because we're now adopted in this family, and we're going back to God because we're heading home. So it's the same with us. So what he's never asking us to do something he hasn't already done for us.
Yeah.
What story comes to your mind of something that you have a suspicion of, but you can't be sure that it's going to have had a profound impact? Because there are times when you encounter a person, maybe only one time, but you know that was something really extraordinary.
Wow.
Thank you for tuning in to the Explorers Podcast. We'd like to remind you that Reflections Ministries is supported by the generosity of our friends like you. If you'd like to donate, please visit reflections.org today. Now back to the podcast.
There are several that come to mind. One was a doctor I met with who was at our study for a while, but I'd only met with him once. We had lunch, but he had so this is a reverse. This is the impact he had on me that he never knew.
Okay.
It had to do with a medical decision for Maxanne, and he cautioned me not to pursue what maybe some doctors were suggesting in regards to some autoimmune things that she was. So we never did anything. And as a result of that, she's never had any further issues. Part of that may be linked to her physical exercise that she picked up in her 50s. But we look back and think, well, that was just a word from the Lord. And, he never knew that about me.
He wouldn't know. Yeah.
But it certainly influenced and impacted our decision and our process at that time. I'm sure there are people that you meet and they're one-offs. I thought
it just occurred to me there. I think of some one-offs. Yeah.
We were at Dave Bars and I and his brother up in Virginia, and we were in this little town. I don't remember the name of it, but we had stopped and I was talking to this gal outside, and I was just prompted to share with her. I looked at her and she was with her sister, and I said, I don't know why, but I think you need to know that God's not done with you yet. And she wept. She gave me the biggest hug. And Dave and his brother are looking at us and they're like, well, Archie's clearly got something else that he's doing involved here. And it wasn't like I was looking for it. It came to mind. And who knows? We went inside and sat down and had dinner, and I don't know why, but God just appointed that. I don't have a lot of those, and it's not like I walk into elevators and lead people to Jesus, but it was just a moment.
One of those,
and I just knew.
Yeah, it's a great gift.
For some reason, she needed to hear that word.
Yeah. So you'll get in the future to find out what it all meant.
Yeah.
Which is a lovely thought.
It is a lovely thought.
All the organic connections that we have. And then they go beyond just our immediacy and actually transcend, going many generations into the past of people we have not met, and many into the future if Jesus tarries, which I don't think he will much longer, but that's another story. The fact is that everyone you touch is an eternal being, and the implications are just profound, and it ripples back and forth in time and space in a way that's profound.
Yeah, there's one other story now that comes to mind. I was with this guy. He was a real estate director for a restaurant group. They were here looking for, and he and I spent the entire day together riding all around Atlanta, and we'd go into different conversations. And then he started asking questions about what I believed and all that. And I just answered, and we'd run around, look at sites. So it was kind of an interesting ebb and flow of conversation. Some of it was, quote, spiritual. Some of it was, quote, secular, but it was all very relational. Well, at the end of the day, we had dinner and kind of wrapping up the day. And he said, I just want to thank you for today. I said, well, it's fine. I mean, it's an opportunity. I'd love to show you the sites so we can do some business. He said, no, for answering my questions. He said, because you didn't get angry. You didn't get upset. You just kind of answered them. And I just really appreciate that because I've had a lot of questions that I haven't been able to ask anyone who was patient enough, I guess. So,
yes.
So he happened to catch me on a good day, and the Lord just used it. But it was, it was so natural and organic. But again, I never saw him again. We never did a deal together. That's I don't know,
but it'll endure. A thing comes to my mind. Now, I did see you again, but it was still one of those transcendent moments. I still remember when I was with you and Maxine, and we were at that table outside. Yeah. And you said, "Why don't you tell us about that?" I'll never forget that moment because it could have been a lifetime, and it would have been enough.
Yeah.
But and privileged to see you over the years and work with you both. But I thought that was a special moment.
That was very special, very special. So I think we're just recently married. Maxine grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, so she had a faith and belief in God, but had some I think emotional things, not so much intellectual, but because of her grandmother being such a spiritual nurturer in her life, she couldn't see and had been with some people who treated her very badly and wanted to do deliverance or ministry on her because she was a former Jehovah's Witness.
I see.
But really, her blessing was she knew about Jesus through that, but not a lot of the other things that can be obstacles in the way, so to speak. So we were at a conference. You were the speaker, and I said, "Well," and she and I, and it had brought some tension into our marriage. I think certainly Satan was using that, and because for her to resolve some of these answers, it required her almost to dismiss what her grandmother believed and what she invested in her life. And I said, "No, it's not necessarily the case." So I said, "Well, I'm going to go down and talk to Ken." She said, Can I come? And I said, "Well, sure." Well, as it turns out, you and her ended up having a conversation that was, at least an hour, and it could have been several hours. And interesting enough, I remember being at the picnic table, and then there was a group of people that kind of surrounded us, and they all just listened.
That's right.
They could sense that it was a holy moment, that there were things that, that you could help her unpack with gentleness and kindness and grace. That, again, she had questions that other people couldn't answer, or chose not to answer. I'm not sure which, but that was a real turning point for her in her walk with Jesus.
Yeah. I can still remember, it's so vivid, where I was sitting, where she was sitting, and going back and forth across the table. And it was a very holy moment. But it was near Clayton, Georgia. I'm trying to remember the name of the. I almost had it. Griffin, somewhere like that. I'm trying to remember the campground. But it was a camping, or some kind of a group that I had, and I was speaking there. But frankly, I don't remember that. I just remember this other. But it had a profound eternal impact.
Yeah.
And that was one of those great moments.
Yeah.
But you don't know when they're going to come. So in all these cases, going back to the understanding we started with, to get a person to realize when their energy diminishes and their relationships and their influence gets smaller. Because I was thinking about this whole idea when it comes to the idea of retirement as well. And when I think about reasons, phase one, we've talked about this before. This Dr. Riley Moynes talked about the 4 phases of retirement. It's very relevant to this point. Vacation, first year, maybe for them, maybe for your dad, it was more or less. It's hard to say, but maybe about a year. But then there's phase 2, the loss and lost. The loss of the big 5, as he described, routine, identity, relationships, purpose, and power, which is an interesting thought. It's an inevitability. We're not going to get stronger as we go after a certain point. And then also the 3 Ds, divorce, depression, decline. And the result for many, and then fear, anxiety, and depression. Then the phase 3 is the trial and error. How can I make my life meaningful again? Not everyone gets there. Phase 4, even fewer goes to that level. Rethink and rewire. And to realize, no, he's used all these things. So in my mind, we want to take a perspective, not retirement or weariness. It doesn't have to do with necessarily retirement. It just has to do with retiring from dropping out of the race.
Dropping out.
And so retirement is one way people drop out of the world in a certain strange, when they find it eats them up, as we see here.
Right.
But the other thing is just dropping out of the race. Apart from retirement, I just don't want to be involved. It's too much of a pushback against my own inclinations. Because frankly, I don't know. I think both of you can affirm that the more we know Jesus, the more we must lose ourselves, come to the end of our own resources, and finally thank God for things I hate and don't want. And only then can I trust Him enough to obey Him. And I know it's true, but we have to experience. I think both of us have a history of loss and recovery because of the loss that actually forces you to realize that you lost your way in the woods because you got your eyes off Jesus. So
right.
Refixing it. Because how do I know what my best interests look like?
Right. Yeah. I thought about that verse, He must increase, I must decrease.
Yes.
And that's continual. And then I think the push now, in the fourth quarter of life is there's tension, and it seems to amplify, not decrease. Whether that's, the weariness of the world, or the deceitfulness of the devil in our flesh.
Yeah.
They want to crave those appetites of Egypt and think, well, this is it. I've only got, X number of years left. I may have a day. So why not eat, drink, and be merry? And that can really be an illusion for people. And again, I think it's something that takes us off the track.
Yeah.
And I think that word perseverance is used in such a way that God knows the tendency is to grow weary.
Yeah.
The tendency is to put our eyes on the competitors or somewhere else other than Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not focused on Him, we will lose heart. It will grow weary.
It's our natural disposition.
It's a natural disposition.
Yeah.
It's like gravity itself takes us down.
Pulls us down constantly. So then part of the thing that pulls us out is the love of others in our lives, like you. you've pulled me out of things and helped me see. I think we've helped each other over the years.
Yeah.
It's been a reciprocal relationship in a peer mentoring relationship. So we actually have a history we can go back to. But it's actually rather good to have a redemptive history because if I let loose of this illusion that I know better than God what my best interests look like, if I stop and thank Him for it, even if it doesn't turn out the way you want it, let loose of it, thank Him for it, and then you move on. Then my life isn't dependent on my idea, but on His idea of what's best for me.
Right. Yeah, that's so important. Yeah, and letting loose of the results. It's funny, I went back this morning, I was just curious. So I have 20 of these little notebooks that I started back in 1987, 88, from Wednesday morning and,
Really?
Retreats, et cetera. It's just kind of interesting to look back and see some of the things and some of the teachings back in the early 90s, and some of the things even that I read this morning tied into what you were teaching out of James this morning. But those truths that were worked into my heart 35 years ago, 36 years ago, they continue. But you have to go back and renew your mind. Those things.
Constantly,
yeah. One friend calls them unguarded strengths. Things that we look past and say, "Well, I used to do that, but I don't do it anymore."
Yeah,
that's a dangerous spot because you're vulnerable at that point.
Yeah, that him who thinks he's not going to fall, let it beware.
Take heed
that he's beyond that. No, not necessarily. Mm-hmm. You can go and be tripped up by the same silly thing that got an amateur.
Yes.
We can still stumble in many ways. So he's got ways of doing that, but we lift each other up. We encourage and empower and equip each other. And I love that idea, and so walking together and sharing life. And I think that's really what life has been meant to be. So the beauty is we've just begun. So with you and I don't know what it's going to look like with you, but I kind of start thinking about what things we might enjoy in a context when it's a unfallen creation, and you're and now sin and so that the world, the flesh, and the devil are removed, no more death, disease, pain, sorrow, suffering. So now you have this resurrected capacity that's vastly greater than it is right now, as well in the resurrected body, in a resurrected world, with new options that you couldn't even dream, and you can suddenly reach all the way back. All generations are concurrent with you. It's amazing stuff. Only things I can hint at and imagine, but I'm trying to do that using my mind's eye, my imagination. And I know that you've been doing that somewhat as well.
Yeah. And Maxine and I have been talking about that because you think about everything that motivates you on this side of heaven will no longer be a motivator, so to speak, other than Jesus. Mm-hmm. So we won't have to worry about what we're going to eat, what we're going to drink, what we're going to wear, what career we're going to have. All these things, who's going to cut the grass and take care of the house and fold the laundry. all those things, the grocery store.
Yeah. Dropping things even. That's all
the list
gone.
goes on and on and on.
And then for other people, though, they might say, my gosh, that's a formula for incredible boredom. I'm just going to be sitting around doing nothing. No, it couldn't be more the opposite. How do you envision it?
Or friendly. Yeah. You think, well, you've got eternity to come to know an infinite being. That's going to be pretty cool.
That's going to be cool because it's going to continue to grow and you're getting more astonished. Yeah. As I've had some more revelations, even with flowers, the realization that I can't grasp this thing that I'm holding and touching. And so how could he make that? And so that you won't be bored with God.
No, I don't think there'll be. It'll be just this increasing sense of awe and wonder.
Yeah. And then I think endeavor, some kind of participation as gardeners, whatever that look like. Gardening, so here I take his mysteries, and everything I touch in nature is mysterious. Seed pod's a mystery to me, and how they forge and form. But I take his mysteries, and I'm privileged to shape them into, like as a garden, I make a herbaceous border, and you'll never find a herbaceous border in nature. You won't find a rose garden that's cultivated or an orchard in nature. So it's a strange thought, isn't it, as you get to think about it, what you have ordered and put things together. Even in making your house or building a business, you are gardening in a certain way. How much more you suppose it'll be there
in the kingdom.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, but it does. There that side of it. There has to be some, as you said, this creative activity that we enter into with God, with others. That everything that we've touched or tasted and seen here, that was true, good, and beautiful, or just or pointers. And they're just a foretaste of the feast to come.
Yes, they're slingshots, as we talk about. You take those best goods, and they're hints of better goods to come.
Yes,
and I think you're both of us are training ourselves to do that, and seeking to live more today in light of that day means I'm going to live more relevantly today because I'm more heavenly minded. So you find that to be part of your own journey and experience, I think.
Yes. Yep. You have to, and I think that part of it is you have to continue to invest in the things that matter.
Yeah.
And the things that will last, because the tendency then will be to invest in the things that are temporal, that are seen, that make me feel good. And for a recovering hedonist, it's always a struggle.
We always know there's a downward pull. Money, sex, and power are never neutral.
Always, they never, and they don't stop. They don't stop. And that's one thing that I gleaned from the friends that I spoke to, is that it's a continual pursuit. It's these things don't stop pulling at you. And they were honest enough to share some of those things with me. That you have to have that community of brothers around you that really love you.
Yes, that accountability, that I can trust people. I don't have secrets.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the things between us. We don't have secrets. We have a commitment to that. Because otherwise I'm vulnerable. I'm trying to protecting myself from me. So we've been graced to serve each other, to equip and encourage each other, to press on for the higher things and not to grow weary and lose heart.
Yes.
But while there's opportunity, we pursue it.
Yes.
I want to thank you for joining me today. And this is Explorers, and I want to invite you to subscribe, to let your friends know, and we'll be picking up with another dialogue with another great friend in the future. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for being a part of the Explorers podcast. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.